Welcome, everyone, to the Special Education Inner Circle podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Witcher, and today we're going to be talking about the difference between homeschooling, homebound services, and remote learning. This is a big topic inside of our special education community because there's a lot of confusion over these terms. There's a lot of using these terms interchangeably, and they're actually three very different things. I just got done doing a panel in the homeschool community with Jane, who is a master IEP coach. If you guys don't know what a master IEP coach is, you can head over to masteriepcoach.com and find out all the details. We help build IEPs that work. We are admins, parents, teachers, therapists who are working together to prepare every child for further education, employment, and independent living. Now, to do that, we have to find the environment that works the best or that is the most appropriate for a child. And here in the middle of our pandemic, that decision is tough. There's a lot of people making decisions right now in a way that they would have never made decisions before. So let's talk about the three different placements, and we're going to talk about curriculum and services inside of those three placements and how they're different from each other. So you can be really clear when you're having conversations with your fellow special needs families or your educators, your colleagues, that you can be very clear in what it means in each of these terms. So again, let's go through this. It's homeschooling, it's homebound placement, or remote learning. Those are our three categories. So when it comes to homeschooling is when you decide that you want nothing to do with your public school. All right. Now, in some states, homeschoolers get some support from their public schools. But when I'm working with a family and coaching them through, choosing the best environment for their child, I make sure that they understand that if you choose to homeschool, anything that your local school district does for your homeschooler is a bonus. It's not something that you want to rely on. So homeschooling means that you have unenrolled your child from school. When you unenroll your child from school, there's an email that's going to go out to the case manager and the speech therapist and the teacher, and it's going to say, this child is no longer enrolled in our district. They're not on your caseload. You are not providing services. That's what homeschooling is. Then we have homebound placement. Homebound placement is something that when your child has an IEP, there's a place right on the document that really distinguishes where your child's going to receive their services. So it's going to be in a classroom, what amount of general education, what amount of special education. There's a placement. One of those placement options is homebound. Homebound is typically used when a child has medical issues that prevent them from going to school, so they receive homebound services. This means that their IEP is still in effect, that they are still enrolled in school, but their placement where they receive services is at home. This is not something that is just for a pandemic. This is something that happens all the time, year-round across the country. Homebound placement. Now, homebound placement does not reflect the full IEP being implemented at home. Homebound placement typically means that there's some version of speech therapy or some version of occupational therapy. There's a teacher that is coming to the home up to a certain amount of hours per week. For example, in the state of Illinois, homebound means that a teacher will come to your house for 5 hours per week. Let me say that again, 5 hours per week. It's not like full-time tutoring at home. It is a homebound placement where a child is receiving services at home that are based off of the IEP, but are not comparative to the entire IEP document. Now, remote learning, what we're in right now, this is where there's a lot of questions because this is new territory, but remote learning means that your child is fully enrolled in school and their placement has not changed. However, due to the current situation, they will be learning at home, and we need to put together some type of remote learning plan or distance learning plan to make sure that we are implementing an appropriate education to the best extent possible to ensure that IEP goals are being worked on. So those are your three different areas: homeschooling, homebound, and remote learning. So let's just review a little bit about the services, a little bit more in depth for each of those. Again, homeschooling, you're not guaranteed services through your public school. Again, each state is different. You can consider it a bonus. You're not relying on them. You're done. In homebound, when it comes to services, and by services, I mean your certified teacher, your OT, your PT, your speech, those services are minimized compared to the IEP document if they were going to be going to school, if the child was going to be going to school and have an IEP that was fully implemented. They're minimized partly because a child's homebound, typically because of medical issues, so they're not able to engage a lot of times in a full type program. And also the services are typically one-on-one. So the benefit of one-on-one versus a one-to-many model means we can typically get a lot more accomplished within that time than if we were in that one-to-many model. And in remote learning, this is where there's a lot of gray area. There is absolutely nothing guiding the schools in what must be provided in a remote learning. That can be very scary in some ways of like, whoa, like nobody's being held accountable to these things. Or it can be looked at as an opportunity of, well, there's really no history of what's been done in a successful remote learning plan. So let's get creative and figure out what's going to work. So now let's talk about curriculum or IEP goals, kind of that really data-driven decisions of, is a child making progress, and what that looks like in each of these situations. So here in homeschooling, that really depends on your state and what your state requires. Again, in the state of Illinois, I have a little bit of experience because I did homeschool my own children for just a couple of years. There's no monitoring of homeschool progress. There's no checks and balances. You get to decide what the curriculum is, what the goals are, how long you work in certain areas. It's 100% flexible, and it's very similar in other states also. So some other states have different checks and balances, different types of paperwork that you need to keep track of. But bottom line is, when you're homeschooling, you're in charge of your child's curriculum, their goals, what they're working towards, and what success looks like. When you are looking at homebound services, this is something that you still have IEP goals that you're working towards. You're still measuring with data. You're still doing your quarterly or trimester type report cards, and data should be shared. You're still working with a team in deciding what would be an appropriate goal to work on in certain areas. It's still a very team decision when it comes to a homebound plan because you're still enrolled in school. Now, with remote learning, the full IEP is still in effect, which means, again, curriculum and the data being taken, the services being provided, you're going to have to find some type of compromise because we're not in school full time, or there are limited opportunities for something like inclusion. There are, because maybe special education students are in school, but the general education students are not in school. So it's really tough to do inclusion inside of the school building when we don't have that opportunity. So we need to make some adjustments. We need to get creative. We need to find some different ideas on how to implement the IEP in full during remote learning, whether that is remote learning partially on campus or full remote learning at home. There's a lot of, again, flexibility in that conversation, but it is still a very team-driven, school-led type program. What I want to make sure that you fully understand, whether your child is homebound, meaning that they're still enrolled in school, but you've changed the placement on the page to homebound, or if the child is remote learning, which means full IEP in effect, placement has not been changed, but you're choosing to do learning at home, that the curriculum and the goals that were chosen for an in-person schooling experience may not be appropriate or effective in these two different choices of either homebound or remote learning. That you absolutely can work with your team and adjust the curriculum, the activities, the data being collected, the expectations, the priorities. This is something that you need to know, that just because it was put on paper at one point, we are in a very different situation right now, and you absolutely need to individualize your experience as a homebound or as a remote learning, and communicating with your team is going to be key. What's working in the classroom when a teacher is teaching in person in a one-to-many model is very different than what's working at home for families who are having success in remote learning. Changing up the activities, the expectations, the priorities is very important to make sure that we are individualizing this remote learning experience at home. So I want you guys to feel really confident now that you understand the difference between homeschooling, as in I'm not enrolled at the school anymore, to homebound of, you know what, we are going to do school at home and we have changed the placement officially on the IEP. Or remote learning, which means that we're just not learning in school full time, that we have some type of adaptation happening, but the IEP remains the same, the placement remains the same. We're just working through the current situation. Be very clear on what term you're using, especially when you're speaking to the school or when you're speaking to your team, your colleagues, because if you slip in that word homeschooling, the school might get the idea of, oh, this family's going to unenroll from school, and that may not be what you mean. So I want you to get really clear on those terms. Feel confident in the decisions that you're making for your child. I want you to remember that whether you're choosing homeschooling, homebound, and negotiating a new placement in that way, or remote learning, it is not a permanent decision. You can make the best decision possible at this time. And if you choose in the future to change your mind on what you want to do, and you want to work with the team to make adjustments to a choice that you're making now, there is no shame in making a change in what is appropriate for your child at any point in time. Again, I'm going to encourage you guys to come over to masteriepcoach.com, learn all things IEPs, dig into it for yourself, for your students, and inside of the Master IEP Coach Mentorship, I'll also teach you how you can help others and change special education outcomes in your community. I'll see you over there at masteriepcoach.com.